Okay.
Thank you very much, Mark, and welcome everyone to a virtual meeting of the Nestrans Board. The first time we have done this, so let's see how it goes. And we're going to start today with a roll call and just say whatever to Mark as he goes through the names in front of him. Thank you, Mark.
Okay, Councillor Sandra MacDonald, Chair.
Here.
Councillor Mollison, who's subbing for Councillor Argyle.
Present.
Maggie Bochel, Vice Chair.
Here.
Councillor Ford, who is substituting for David Aitchison.
Present.
Councillor Bell.
Present.
Councillor Carr.
Here.
Councillor Cox. Councillor Hutchison.
Yeah.
Councillor Mackenzie.
Here.
Colin Allenach. No Colin?
Sorry, I forgot to switch on my microphone. Still here. First failure.
Jerry Donald.
Present.
Ian Ross.
Present.
And George Mayer.
Present.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. And can I first of all ask if there are any declarations of interest from members of the board today? Raise your hand. We have none. So let's move on to the minutes that we have in front of us from the last board meeting, which was way back in 12th of February. And I recall we had then a presentation from Gillian Evans on public health. And it was just when I was reading it through, I was reminded that at that time we didn't know really what was in front of us in terms of public health pandemic in our midst. So can I ask if members are happy to approve the minutes?
Agreed.
Excellent.
Great.
Thank you, members. And then we'll move on to item 1.4, which is on Director Delegated Powers, and I'll call in Rab for this one. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. At one note, I was going to intervene on the minute under item 5. At the last at the meeting in February, we had hoped to have a lunch with the Cabinet Secretary. Obviously, with the COVID crisis, that was postponed, and we now have penciled in a date of Wednesday, the 28th of October. So just for members' information, on that item 5 on the previous minute. Item 1.4 relates to delegated powers to the director or to myself. At the time when I was put in as a temporary director, measures were taken to make sure that there was procedures in place so that decisions could be made and the proper officer was in place. However, at that time, I think it was January of 2019, it was asked that a report be brought back to a future committee suggesting whether any of the delegation required to be updated. So I've included as Appendix 1 to the report on page 17, a list of the powers to the Nestrans Director, and there are a couple of minor suggested changes which have been underlined and placed in italics. I think they're all fairly straightforward, and if anything, making it more open than before. And therefore, the suggestion is that the recommendation is to approve these delegated powers, which are primarily a roll forward of what they have been since 2008. However, I'm suggesting one change, which is that in the event that the director be expected to be off on long term, we've suggested over 3 weeks, that we should be in a situation where the transport strategy manager, who's Paul Finch obviously, should be able to get these powers if necessary, and that should be done by approval of the chair and vice chairs. Obviously, we can get a period of up to 3 months between board meetings, and it would be inappropriate for Nestrans to be without anyone taking these decisions. So it suggested that that power be available should the chair and vice chairs deem it necessary. Happy to take any questions, Chair.
Councillor Michael.
Thank you. So I've just had to half the screen. I can't find the buttons just now. It's on Appendix 1 on Delegated PowerPoint 1. It's got it mentions to authorise spend on particular items of equipment, and then also up to a maximum of 10,000. Is I realise this is just a change. Is a reference as to what particular items those are, and up to a maximum, is there scope for that to be split as such? Say, like two items would be £12,000, but you can buy one item at £6,000 and then separately other item at £6,000. Just kind of.
Thanks, Chair. If I could come back on that, I think it has always been applied fairly casually, if that's the right phrase. I would always report major items of expenditure to the board at the next available meeting. In terms of up to £10,000, yes, it has been small consultancies, the purchase of furniture or a computer if a new member of staff comes into being, for example. The budgets themselves come to every board meeting, so the headings would be approved already, I would hope, by the Nestrans Board, and then it's just the day-to-day ordering of equipment or sometimes consultancy services or advertising, etc. Basically, small amounts of money, but they would be normally reported back to a future board once that's taken.
Should I come
Mike,
back in?
you want to come back in?
Yep. Just so the word particular there, would that just be extraneous then to the delegated powers? Is there a need for the word particular to be in there then?
As far as I'm aware, it's always been in. It's not one that I've picked up or added. No, it does seem a little bit of an anomaly, doesn't it?
Jerry, you wanted to come in to ask a question.
Thank you, Chair. I'm in agreement with the appendix in full, with the exception perhaps of the wording at item 11, to accept gifts on behalf of Nestrans. It seems a bit odd in the public sector to be able to accept gifts, and I just would question whether indeed that's appropriate.
Rab, would you like to answer that one?
We don't get offered an awful lot of gifts, Jerry, but yes, it has always been an acceptance. I suppose what the intention of that is that only the director can accept gifts on behalf of Nestrans. I've added the phrase subject to these being recorded and available for inspection. We have occasionally had calendars, for example. So the one which we do sometimes get, and we do have a gifts register, the one that we do sometimes get is invitations, perhaps to dinners, etc., which we've always included on the gifts register. I'd be quite happy to share that with the board if you felt that would be helpful. I'm thinking that probably over the last 18 months that there's probably been none, but we do keep a register of anything that's offered, even if it's refused, because once or twice we have been offered gifts, a bottle of whiskey at Christmas, for example, and they're always politely no thanked, but we register them on the list of gifts offered as well.
I think if I may, Chair, just come back in at that just to say that I'm happy with Rab's explanation there, but the way it's worded, it seems there's unlimited scope to gifts, and I remember not that long ago the Auditor General being dismissed from post in Scotland because he accepted a gift of a week's cruise in the Mediterranean. And I accept, Rab, these days these things don't happen in the public sector, but I think perhaps just a small qualification around small gifts and maybe putting a value in against that, and that these be recorded in the hospitality register, even if gifts are refused, would be helpful.
Thanks, Jerry. Maggie, you wanted to come in too?
Yeah, I was just going to suggest what Jerry suggested about having a kind of cap on the value of the gift, whether that's £50 or £100, or I suppose it depends on what the gift is, because a gift to a charity dinner these days can be worth 50 quid, but that's probably something we wouldn't want to turn down, because you're also spending money at charity dinners. But maybe some kind of a cap on it would be helpful.
Thanks for that. So we have the recommendations in front of us. Can I suggest that we, at recommendation 1, when we're looking at Appendix 1, that we take on board Michael's change and just take out the word particular in item number 1, and then in number 11 to put in to accept small gifts on behalf of Nestrans, and if we were to put in a cap there of what would you suggest? £50, would that be reasonable? I don't know what a small
Sandra,
gift.
could I comment?
Please come in.
Hello?
Hello, yes, please.
Yes. I I would leave it vague. There may be a need for something like appropriate. Sometimes it is very difficult to avoid, without causing gross offence to a visitor, to decline to accept something, and it clearly is not corruption, it is not inappropriate. The moment you start putting an exact figure on it, somewhere it's going to cause a problem. I think Rab knows perfectly well, and we all know what is appropriate and what is not appropriate, and even by a sustainable mode of transport, a cruise in the Mediterranean is clearly not appropriate. If people feel it's necessary, I might be happy with sort of comma as appropriate, comma, just to make it clear that he doesn't get to accept all gifts. But I think in practice, everybody knows that perfectly well. And actually, by delegating that authority to the director, you've quite clearly given a responsibility for a decision as to whether in a particular circumstance it's appropriate or not to the right person.
Thanks, that was helpful, Martin. So can we agree at number 11 to put in to accept as appropriate gifts on behalf of Nestrans? Is that acceptable to the board?
Agreed. Yep. Agreed.
Thank you for that. Can I take you back a little step now to 1.1, where I've omitted to actually put on record the changes to the membership of the Nestrans Board. So if you could take us through that, that would be great. Thanks, Mark.
Sorry, just bear with me a second. Yes, just some very recent changes. We've had Councillor Michael Hutchison replacing Councillor Alec Nichol as a substantive member, and Councillor David Cameron replacing Councillor Hutchison as a substitute member. That's for Aberdeen City Council. And then one for Aberdeen Shire Council, Councillor George Carr replacing Councillor Colin Pike as a substantive member.
So welcome again, all of you. Yeah, and you've got your hand up. Would you like to come in on any of the points raised?
No, my apologies. I thought I'd taken it down. The matter was concluded successfully. Thank you. Sorry.
Yeah, Ian. Maggie, you're the same. I suspect you.
No, I wanted to say in relation to the delegated powers that item 1 makes reference to particular items of equipment, but Rab said they also used that power for small items of consultancy. So I just wondered whether we should just say authorised spend to a maximum of £10,000 and take out the equipment as well as the particular items.
Are the board happy to go with the suggestion made by Maggie?
Yep, seems fine.
Yes.
Yes.
Thanks for that. Okay, if we could go on then to our budget matters and bring in Anne MacDonald on our annual audit plan 2019-20. Hello, have we got Anne? Are you available? I can see your. We can't hear you, Anne.
Thank you. I'm here now. Yes. Hi, sorry, I had trouble unmuting myself there. Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Yes, this is our annual audit plan for the audit of the 1920 financial statements. So the plan was agreed with officers back in March, but I find it useful probably to bring it to you at this meeting when you have the unaudited accounts alongside. So turning first of all to exhibit 1, which is on page 24 of your papers. So the format of the report is the same as you've seen in previous years, where we identify some particular risks that we'll be focusing on as part of the audit. So at exhibit 3, we have 3 particular risks there, and they're all quite routine risks. They're not anything that's specifically an issue related to the 1920 accounts. Specifically, they're ones that we tend to deal with more routinely. So the first one, management override of controls. This is obviously where we're looking at whether there may be the potential, the risk of management manipulating figures. So this is a requirement by auditing standards that we look at this in every audit that we do. So this is a feature in all our plans and in all the bodies that we audit. So from that respect, it's fairly routine. The second one as well, financial capacity. Where there's changes in the team, who the finance team are responsible for preparing the accounts, or if there's changes in regulations or statute, then we would tend to have a risk round about that, just because there's a change and there may be a need to focus in on more particular issues. So as you'll know, that's been the case this year. Some changes in the team responsible for the production of the accounts, and also with the new transport legislation coming in, there's now the opportunity for the board to have a general fund within its annual accounts, which wasn't the case in the past. So there's new things to be thinking about. So that's identified as number 2. And the third one is something that we have annually as well, in terms of the fact that Nestrans ledger sits within the Aberdeenshire ledger. So this is just particular work that we do to make sure that all the right transactions all end up in the right place. So just to make sure that everything's in Nestrans should be there, and there's nothing in there that shouldn't be there. So for that respect, there's work that we'll be doing specifically and reporting back to you when we come back with the audited accounts. Moving on to exhibit 2, which is at page 26. So this is just showing you the outputs that come to you. So there'll be our audit opinion and our annual audit report, and due to come back to you with those in September. So obviously, since we produced the plan, we've had the situation with the pandemic, and what's been happening across the public sector in terms of the accounts. The deadlines have all been moving. So first of all, the NHS accounts would normally be signed off for the end of June. That's moving to September. And as a result of that, the knock-on is that local government, which traditionally comes later, the deadlines for that moves from the end of September to the end of November. So we've just been juggling around the audits that we do locally within my team, and I think we should still be on schedule to come back in September as usual. We wouldn't need any extended time for the Nestrans audit. So hopefully, all going well, we'll come back to you in September as usual with the audited accounts and our annual audit report. Just at the bottom of page 26 there is our audit fee. So you'll see it's held the same level as previous years. The next 2 pages are really going through just a reminder of the roles and responsibilities for the finance team in producing the accounts and for us as auditors. And at exhibit 3 on page 29, just highlighting here there the materiality levels that we set in relation to the work that we do. So materiality is just a reminder, that's the level of error that we would allow in the accounts without it impacting on our audit opinion. In the normal run of events, any significant misstatements that are identified, we would agree with finance. We would usually adjust them anyway, but in terms of how we plan our work, we have this level so that we can be thinking about the level of error. And if we were finding a lot of errors, which we don't, but it's just to explain the process. If we were, then that would trigger us to do additional work as we go. But just for you to know that 63,000 is the figure that we're working with. Then Exhibit 4 just provides a more of the timetable of the accounts, how the process runs from now, the unaudited accounts you're considering today, through to the audited accounts in September. Exhibit 5, a reminder of our wider scope responsibilities. So as part of our Code of Audit Practice, we're interested obviously in the financial statements, but we're also interested in the wider the governance and decision making that the board works in. So in all our audits, we're considering what we call wider scope, and it's those dimensions set out in Exhibit 5: financial sustainability, financial management, governance and transparency, and value for money. But Nestrans being a smaller body, what we do in our smaller boards, we focus in on two particular issues, which is financial sustainability and governance and transparency. And there's a reminder on page 31 of what we're looking at in these particular headings, and we give judgments on those. And again, we'll report back on those when we come back in September. The bottom of page 31, just a reminder about independence and how we work. So I can confirm that there aren't any matters that I need to bring to your attention with regard to conflicts of interest or any other matters around independence with regard to my team and this particular audit. And finally, on page 32, just a reminder of the quality control process that's in place, both internally and externally. People are always very keen to know that the auditors are audited as well. So that's just a reminder of our process. Thank you, Chair. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Anne. Can I invite members to put their hand up? Philip, you'd like to ask a question. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of questions just with regard to Exhibit 3, materiality. So can I take it that 2% gross is a standard accounting metric? And how do you know you've got 2%?
We can work it anywhere between 1% and kind of 3% is our kind of norm. So it just really depends on the scale of the body. But for our smaller audits, yeah, 2% would generally be what we're working to, and we're working on gross expenditure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Anne? So if we go back to the...
Yes. Sorry, Sandra.
Yes, of course. Go ahead.
I'm looking at your scope of the audit, and you particularly mentioned there governance and transparency. Now, I'm obviously aware of what you do with the council, with Aberdeenshire Council, and whilst you won't question political judgments about priorities, you will question whether the council is evaluating those appropriately and whether it's measuring them appropriately. Now, in the following paper, you report on Nestrans activities in respect of indicators on target, indicators with some success. That is part of governance and transparency. And the issue, and I would be the first to accept that indicators are really, really difficult to devise, that they often measure things that you're not trying to measure, and all the rest of it. But nevertheless, I think there is a very strong case to be said that some of the indicators are contradictory with one another and do not accurately reflect the stated aims. And I wonder whether the effectiveness and transparency of the indicators is something that you would look at, rather than just reporting which ones Nestrans thinks are going in the wrong direction. Some of us might think that the wrong direction is the wrong choice of direction to be pleased about. But you know, we've got indicators that indicate we're very pleased if we reduce carbon emissions from road transport, but delighted if we increase carbon emissions by having more air passengers. So is that an area of governance and transparency that you might want to look at to see whether Nestrans is accurately conveying what it is doing and what is happening to a member of the public who wanted to look at the indicators?
Thanks, Martin. Anne, would you like to respond to that?
I think a general yes would be the answer. The answer to your question. When we're looking at indicators, we're very much interested in how they've been selected and why they've been selected, and that the board is happy that that they are the measures that they find are important to them. So that would always be my starting point. You know, they're your indicators. You want to have what you think is important in measuring your business. So that's where my starting point would be, is that process as to how they were selected and chosen. And then as a secondary, what we're looking at is this is information that's going out into the public domain. How clear and transparent is that to a lay reader? So within that, it would be, you know, say information, is it making sense and does it hang together? So I think it's in the second bit this year is the key bit of your question. So yes would be my answer.
Thanks very much, Anne. With that and no more questions, can I, hello?
Could I briefly come back, Sandra?
Yeah, absolutely. Although I am conscious of time, Martin,
Okay,
and we have a huge report in front of us.
It will be brief. And it is the second point, of course. The board correctly decides what it wants to measure, but you as auditor could say, but you are not reporting or measuring that well because you have got a poor choice of indicators, and that's perfectly proper audit view.
Yes, I think your point is noted, Martin. It's difficult for Anne to respond to that, I would have thought, but I think that point is well made. Is there anything you want to say to that, Anne, or so you're happy to note?
Oh no, yes. I mean, I agree. Absolutely agree with what's being said, and I'll take that in view. But yes, absolutely, yeah.
Excellent. Thanks very much for that. Thanks, Martin. Can we then agree to note the audit plan provided by Audit Scotland there? Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. If we move on to 2.2, members, we have unaudited annual accounts, and Chris Smith is going to take us through the next section of the agenda.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. Purpose of this report, following on from Anne MacDonald's report, is to consider the unaudited annual accounts for 2019-20 and also for the board to approve the final delay in drawdown. I will draw your attention to Appendix 1 is the official annual accounts document. I've also included at Appendix 2 the standard budget monitoring statement for the year to 31st of March 2020, and this is basically the final version of what we report to the board on a periodic basis throughout the financial year. Also draw your attention to Appendix 3, which details the drawdown to be taken from 1920 and carried forward to 2021. Two recommendations. Consider these unaudited annual accounts and approve their issue onto the external auditor and the controller of audit, and also to approve the final delay in drawdown as I've highlighted in Appendix 3. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chris. I've got a question in from Ian.
Thank you. Yes, and this time I did mean it. Take it down. This isn't my area of expertise, so as a complete layman, I would welcome an explanation on the comments on page 35, referring to Appendix 2, showing a deficit of 57,000. Previous year it was 116,000. How does Nestrans keep ticking over when it's in the red each year? and who fills the gap. And if I've embarrassed myself by asking a Diddy question, I would welcome some education. Thank you.
Thanks, Ian. Chris, would you like to respond to that?
Yeah, sure. There are reserves held. Underspends are carried forward and held by the two contributing authorities. So any accounting underspend is taken care of under that. You know, I draw your attention there to that deficit is a, you know, we're showing taking into account the accounting principles there in relation to the pension fund. So the Nestrans itself is still an ongoing concern, and as I say, the constituent authorities have the ability to provide that funding going forward for Nestrans.
Okay, Ian?
I think so. If I may come back just for added clarity, if I may. So that means in previous years, Nestrans has had a surplus, which has gone into a reserve, which for the past 2 years, we've been drawing money out of. Presumably there comes a finite point where we can't continue drawing money from reserves.
Yeah, it's not a reserve as such at present. It's the fundings held by the constituent authorities and released as required by need. As Anne mentioned, there is now the possibility of reserves being held by Nestrans as an authority themselves. But yes, you know, we can't continue on an ongoing deficit position. The same as any business.
Finally, very quickly, we're taking steps to make sure that we don't go into the red.
Yes, yeah, and I think you know, Rab and the team would would agree with that.
Thank you. Any other questions? Just looking at the recommendations, then, members, can we consider them and approve the final delay in drawdown at B? Agreed?
Yes.
Agreed.
Thanks, members. If we can then move on to the 2020-21 budget, Chris?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Purpose of this report is focusing on the 2021 monitoring. We have had confirmation from the constituent authorities and other bodies on the level of funding for 2021, and that's been included in the budget as set for 2021 for Nestrans. We'll also, as I referred to in response to the previous answer, there is and Anne raised as well through external audit, that there is the possibility of holding a reserve now for Nestrans. So there's an article on that, and a report will be coming back to the board with recommendations following consideration between the constituent authorities and Nestrans director themselves. If you take to the recommendations, there are a number. So as I said, to note the funding awards that have been confirmed, note the monitoring position to the end of May, and also a forecast for the remainder of the year. Notify that we've had some additional grant funding for 2021 on a number of projects. Number 4, just to say that a report will be coming back to the board after consideration, and approve the requested environment as detailed in the report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Chris. Can I invite members now to ask any questions around this particular paper? If no one's got any questions, can I ask the board, as suggested, that we note items 1, 2, 3, and 4 and approve the requested environment? Is that acceptable?
Yes.
Nods of head, I see. Thank you very much, members. Okay, if we could then move on to 2.4 is the Treasury Management Statement. Chris, that's you again, I think.
Yeah, me again. Yes, thank you, Chair. This is an annual report and strategy that's put to Nestrans, and it's similar along the lines of what the constituent authorities would have in terms of their treasury management strategy. Laid out in Appendix A and B, the detail within the strategy, but I would also note that within the implications section on the covering report, we have made mention there to historically low interest rate environment, and also the wider economic climate, given the the situation we find ourselves in regarding COVID. So this will be something that will be closely monitored with Aberdeenshire Treasury colleagues during financial year 2021 and indeed beyond. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thanks for that, Chris. Have we got any questions? Ian, maybe did you want to come in on that? Ian, Treasury Management.
Yep, on page 98, there's reference to the Clydesdale Bank. It says it's now a standalone bank. Maybe memory was fading, but I thought they got taken over by, was it Virgin? Somebody or other. And they're about to be rebranded and lose their independent identity.
Are you aware of that, Chris?
Yeah, this was taken from the Treasury team. I will go back and double check what the latest is with regards to the proposed takeover and report back.
Thanks for that, Chris. Any other questions, members? If not, the recommendation is to approve the strategy. If we could do that, but also if Chris, if you could circulate to all members the query around Clydesdale Bank, that would be much appreciated.
Will do.
Thank you. Thank you, members. That's that one. If we could move on to the report from Paul Finch is going to take us through the COVID-19, what we've been doing.
Okay, thanks very much, Sandra. I hope you can hear me okay. So, let's get my notes up. Right, this is a piece of work that really began early in April when we started understanding the magnitude of what was before us in terms of the COVID lockdown. And the report acts as a way of recording our actions and our thinking as an organisation in response to COVID-19 and reflect on some of the key impacts. We anticipate that some of the elements of the protective measures that are being put in place will persist for some time, but the legacy on the transport network will last even longer. So operationally, the response of Nestrans was to swiftly close the office once the government advice was issued, and we all moved on to remote working protocols facilitated by MS Teams. Following the recent moves from the different stages, I guess myself and Rab and others are beginning to have tentative thoughts about how the office might be reopened, but that is certainly a medium-term thought at the moment, and very much we're focused on the remote working protocol at the moment. Certainly operationally, in terms of the operation of the board, we're keeping in step with our local authority partners, and the biggest operational constraint has really been the restriction on face-to-face consultation activities, which we would be normally undertaking with our partners. Strategically, the key issue has been trying to quickly understand what is happening on the transport network, what might happen in terms of future scenarios playing out, and how we can best use our resources to respond to emerging priorities and inform our regional partners. And some of the high-level impacts are listed in Appendix 1 to the report. Basically, public transport capacity being reduced, but now timetables are beginning to ramp up. There may well be a hit on attitudes to public transport. Vehicle kilometres and traffic has plummeted, but now begins to rise as the lockdown measures are released. Working from home and flexi working has obviously surged, and business trips are suppressed. That may change the peak nature of traffic, and it also may change over longer term organisations' thinkings on the use and utilisation of available office space. There's been large increases, percentage increases in walking and cycling activity across the region. Airport traffic has significantly reduced. The logistics network appears to have held up generally well across the lockdown period. Construction activity has been halted, but I would note that Kintore Station is aiming to get back to construction early in July. There's been a disruption to the programme of Transport Scotland's programme of transport planning as they focus more on COVID impacts, and issues such as the strategic projects transport review has been postponed or delayed whilst there is more internal reflection within Transport Scotland. So that's some of the key high level indicators that we have been watching and seeing what's been going on. In terms of the work that we have been doing, we've been trying to apply 5 principles, which is about operating safely and effectively, valuing our contacts and our networks, making best use of the available information that we have, but recognizing the uncertainty around that at this time, trying to be as agile and responsive as we can in terms of our actions, and focusing on short-term actions, but those which are compatible with the longer-term vision. Quickly take you through some particular actions that we have undertaken. First of all is network adaptation, and that's with our work with the local authority partners on spaces for people, looking at the changes of road space, cycle routes and pedestrian availability in some of our towns and cities. There's been significant updates to our travel planning, advice and communications publicised via our Get About website. We've also been looking at how we can promote safe public transport use, and there's been a reallocation of funds from Civitas work, and an advertising campaign has been developed working with our partners in terms of how we can push the message on how to safely and appropriately use public transport use under the new protocols. We're looking at delivering and continuing to work with our partners on delivering active travel improvements. And I'd also highlight at this page the success we've been having in the promotion of the electric cargo bikes, which we've made available to city centre businesses for short-term deliveries during the period of lockdown. We're very much actively looking around new thinking about electric bikes, transport hubs, and also being aware of the longer changes in land use pressures that might prevail. And finally, as well, we've been looking at doing attitude and activity surveys, making best use of modelling and data. And we've recently commissioned Sistra, a consultancy firm, who are going to be doing a series of monthly attitude surveys, which will make available across our partners using funding that was secured last year for Pass for All. That was previously going to be used for some baselining work. However, we realised that baselining work would probably not be appropriate to collect at this time. So we repurposed that money to collect attitudes across the North East Scotland about the changes to transport and how they may well be thinking of changing their patterns going forward. So the recommendations are to note the operational changes, support the key principles that we're working through, and just note the examples of how those principles are now being applied to our work. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you for that, Paul. And I see, George, you'd like to ask a question on this paper.
Yeah, it's more just a comment, Chair. It was just to say, yeah, I agree with recommendations. I think we've also got to be mindful that we're currently responding to a crisis and involved in recovery to that crisis, but we must be careful we don't just act in haste with decisions based on current response situation going forward, because that may cause issues further down the line. So I think that would have to be subject to the usual discussions and consultations with our communities, because we can get ourselves in trouble by assuming that this is the new norm when in fact it may well not be. So we need to be careful. Thank you.
Thanks for that, George. Philip.
Thank you, Chair. Interesting report. Thank you, Paul. Just at page 109, item C, promoting safe public transport use. So I note that First have, for instance, they've got an addition to their smart app, and they actually show the number of spare seats available on their buses. So my question really is, have any other operators done that across the piece. And what sort of uptake has there been? What sort of use has there been of public transport? I'm very aware that we're trying to, with our spaces, safe spaces for people, whatever, we're trying to actually realign roads, pavements, so forth. But anything that happens seems to be done via private transport, possibly bicycles as well, to travel short distances. Long distances are going to be an issue. But what is actually happening, do you believe, with public transport? How much use is being made of that, do you think?
Okay, thanks very much for the question. On the first point, which is about the app, about real-time capacities, it is my understanding at the moment that First Group are the only companies who are making that available, albeit the regional transport partnerships and Transport Scotland are organising a discussion on that very matter, I think later on this week, where we can assess the patterns of that particular use and whether that could be rolled out. So I don't have an answer to that, but we'll monitor that, because obviously if you have a bus which has reduced capacity, if after the first half a dozen stops it begins to get full, then that is obviously a problem for the passengers who are closer into the city centre. So that is a particular issue that we are aware of going forward. Unfortunately, by the time I was writing this report, I did not have a reliable or trends on public transport use other than obviously during the lockdown period it was fairly decimated, and at the moment I don't necessarily have figures showing what the recovery is at the moment. I would imagine it's still relatively low, restricted to essential workers who don't have access to a car only, but the public transport operators are now ramping up their timetables in anticipation of the easing of lockdown, which will begin from Monday onwards. So I don't have the figures at the moment. I don't know if any if any of us have an understanding of that, but that's my understanding of where we are at the moment, Councillor.
Thank you. May I just ask a very quick supplemental, please, Chair? And it's probably a daft ready question, but I am guessing that with the reduction in seating capacity, there is absolutely no standing capacity at all available in buses.
I understand that's the formal position. The capacities are limited by the space available in either the single or double decker buses that are available, and standing is not encouraged or permitted as the operators go forward.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks for that. Martin, would you like to come in now? And
yes,
then Ian.
Thank you very much, Sandra. And thank you to Paul for an interesting paper. Yes, I do have some comments. Firstly, where it's proposed there are 5 key principles. I'm not disagreeing with any of the 5 key principles, and the point I make is implicit in several of them. But the other principle that I certainly think should be applied is learning from the, well, if you like, unintended and unwanted experiment that we are still conducting. Because an awful lot of things that you could not normally have, as it were, imposed to see what happened have been imposed in this unwanted emergency, and some of what's happened has not been entirely expected. So I live in a rural area. The roads around where we live are legally 60-mile-an-hour roads, and an awful lot of motorists inappropriately do travel quite close to 60 mile an hour on them. And very, very few people are prepared to walk even a short distance out of the village on the road because they don't feel safe doing so, let alone cycle. The reality is that the traffic has been reduced and calmed down, and actually there is clearly a huge unmet wish to cycle and walk on our rural roads, which people are now exercising. And if we go back to where we were before, they'll stop doing it again, and we actually don't want that. So I would argue that there is a 6th principle, which is learning from what has just happened and applying what we have discovered. Some really interesting and useful information, which we all wish we hadn't done the experiment, but we have done it. We didn't have any choice about that, and we found out things we could not normally have found out, so let's use them. And then if we go over the page to the examples of early action, section B says travel planning, advice and communications. And prior to the pandemic, travel planning was based on a hierarchy. Now, there were very good long-term reasons for that hierarchy, and they're still all true. So the hierarchy certainly shouldn't be abandoned. I think somebody, Councillor Carr perhaps, has already effectively referred to that. But if you look at that hierarchy, the first one is travelling less. Well, we've done that. We've done that in huge amounts. An awful lot of people have discovered they don't need to go into work every day who were doing it simply because it's what they did. Walking and cycling, we've done that hugely more. So the first two things in our priority list from before have actually just received a huge increase because of the circumstances. Now, public transport, different and more complicated. I've never forgotten the comment from the unsuccessful London mayoral candidate Stephen Norris that the trouble with public transport was the public are on it. The trouble with public transport now is that the public are not on it, and we have come full circle in that. And there are issues about masks and all the rest of it. There's clearly going to need to be a lot of work on that. But actually, an awful lot of the hierarchy, the reasons for it are still sound. Climate change hasn't gone away. Congestion has gone away. You know, you can almost see news stories now. You know, good news, air pollution is increasing again. No, it's not good news. There are all sorts of ways that our environment has become hugely better over the last few weeks. And we don't want some of the bad stuff back. So I think we need to apply learning here. I have slight reservations about the use of the word recovery, because although we do, of course, need to recover, recovery does have an implicit back to where we were. And actually, we can take stuff from this and go to a better place. And I think there is this general intention to build back better, to have a better new normal. And recovery slightly implies let's go back to the previous status quo. And I think we can do better than even attempting to do that. We can take the best of what's happened. We didn't want this, but there was no escaping it, and learn from it. So those would be my comments, Chair. I think, you know, it's an interesting paper. I'm not moving a formal amendment or anything, but I think there are some points there that deserve further consideration.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And I certainly, when I was reading the report, particularly in the section about being flexible, I think there's stuff in that around about learning from what we've done. Ian, you wanted to come in, and then we can.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It's maybe too early for Paul to say an awful lot about it, but because of the unusual conditions at the moment, are there any studies which would be affected by the fact that you cannot collect representative data just now?
Oh.
Yeah, okay, on there's two things here. I guess the private development industry requires traffic data to undertake and progress transport assessments, probably not on a Nestrans view, but for local authorities. And one way that we've helped or are helping that the development industry is to make available the series of accounts that were undertaken to support the upgrade of the ASAM model that we did last October. So that is one way that we can help to facilitate progress. In other areas, there has obviously been a disruption in terms of the normal stakeholder, probably more the public consultation that we might have undertaken, or community council consultation, because many stakeholders are semi-professional, professional, and were able to adapt to the digital way of working. Clearly, I think the gap has been on perhaps community councils and other community organisations, which perhaps are catching up on some of these technologies and getting to grips of it at a short stage. And I guess that is something that we've got to be particularly wary of. At the moment, there's been workarounds about how we get around that. And perhaps this is a relevant consideration when we think about the consultation on the regional transport strategy, which is ongoing. Although at the moment, I don't think there was obviously a blip around March time when we were all sorting ourselves out as to how we do move forward. But I think the majority of studies that are underway regionally, we've adapted to the new requirements and are pushing ahead as best we can on the basis of more electronic and consultation using the internet.
Okay,
thanks
for that.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's fine. Thanks very much.
So nobody else seems to be wanting to make comment or ask questions. So can I ask on page 110, we have the 3 recommendations there. Can we agree, members, on those recommendations?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Excellent. Okay, just going back, we had you've maybe seen in the chat there that Chris Smith has come back to us responding to the question on the Clydesdale Bank. It still stands alone, but will be rebranded Virgin Money in the future, but nothing will change in terms of the day-to-day management of the bank. So that was information for members there.
Thank you.
And fine.
You're on mute. Chair.
Councillor MacDonald, you're on mute.
Oh, thank you very much, Mark. Yeah, so let's move on to the regional transport strategy that we have in front of us, and I think start by thanking our officers for what is been a huge amount of work, much of it done in the last few months of putting together, and so many thanks for that. There'll be a 2 or 3 officers coming in at various points in this 4.1 section of our agenda. So we'll start though with Rab and set the scene for us, if you wouldn't mind, Rab. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chair. Item 4.1, as you say, is the draft regional transport strategy for 2040. Something we've all been working on, not just officers, but stakeholders and obviously the board as well through workshops over the last year or more. And some of the elements of the strategy have already been considered by board and are very much reflected in the first half of the strategy document. So the pillars were previously approved and come really directly from the National Transport Strategy, reflecting the guidance that's coming from Transport Scotland and the Scottish Government, but putting a northeast slant on them. And the 6 priorities, again, have been discussed in a workshop situation by the board and the vision taken forward, as have some elements around the strategy, the detail around rapid transit, around demand management, etc. There have also been other inputs, the strategic transport appraisal, and Paul will talk a little bit about that afterwards. It's been included in a summary of it as Appendix C, but there's been a lot of engagement around that development of policy thinking as well, including with all members, with members of Parliament and members of the Scottish Parliament, as well as stakeholder meetings and the meeting of the North East Transport Consultative Forum. We've also had a number of discussion papers which have been publicised through a dedicated website called Nestrans 2040. And from all of this, we've managed to pull together a proposed strategy, which I'm very pleased to put in front of members today. The strategy itself is sort of from section 10 onwards. It's in 18 topic headings, if you like. And I'm appreciative that it is a strategy that runs to 90 pages. So if members have managed to wade their way through that, I'm really glad and grateful. And you know, we're very keen to hear comments and views from the members today. However, bearing in mind that it's a 90-page report, we also thought that it was appropriate to prepare a summary, an accessible and easy to read version, which we've called At a Glance, and it's been attached as Appendix B to the report as well. So a 7 or 8 page summary document with graphics, which I hope and think will be much more accessible to stakeholders, to members of the public and others who maybe aren't as into the detail of a transport strategy as the members are here. I think and I believe that the strategy is realistic. It sifts out projects which we don't believe can have a positive business case or a likelihood of funding in the period to 2040. And it also offers the opportunity to consider funding options and how we maximise the income from external partners such as Transport Scotland, by making sure we have sound business cases to take forward the elements of the strategy. I also believe it's ambitious. It identifies key projects which directly address the challenges, connectivity, the move to net zero, and also contribute to the agreed priorities, the 6 high-level targets we've talked about, an aim of zero fatalities, an aim of healthy emissions, an aim of better accessibility, and behind that, an ambition of a 50-50 mode split. The 50-50 mode split, recognising that the car is a part of the overall strategy, but that we would encourage people to try and think about alternatives to the car, whether it's for short trips, whether it's for trips to major cities, which can maybe be done by train, or even just to think about whether you can work from home, as we've all been doing quite recently. We also think it's a balanced strategy. It includes public transport and active travel as key elements of it. But as I say, recognising the need and the role of the car, but managing its role within that overall strategy. I did want to emphasise that being asked today to approve for consultation, so you don't necessarily need to agree with every word or sign up to every policy there, but I think it's important that we see it as an overall package, that the elements work together. And both councils and all stakeholders will get a chance to impact and influence the strategy as it develops. But I think it would be our intention to try and get something that we could submit to the Cabinet Secretary by the end of this calendar year. There is an opportunity, I think, to maximise the funding contribution that we can access, particularly from Transport Scotland, as they develop a strategic transport projects review. And I think the timing is right for us to put in paper what we feel is the way forward for the North East. It does fit, I believe, with local, regional and national ambition. It focuses on equalities, it focuses on climate, carbon and emissions. It looks at economic strength and the connectivity of this region and how we recover and grow the economy, but it also recognises health and well-being as key elements. I think it would be my intention, Chair, to encourage members to maybe discuss the strategy as in Appendix A and Appendix B at this point, and then we can bring in Paul to talk about the supporting documentation later in the meeting, if that's okay. And then I think Kirsty is going to talk about consultation, engagement, and where we go from here. So hand over to the board to encourage contributions and comments, and happy to take any comments or questions. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that, Rab. And I see already we've got George has got his hand up to either ask a question or make a comment. Go ahead, George.
Thanks, Sandra. I was just going to refer to page 132, 8.4 on car usage. So I think it does jump out of the whole strategy is just how dependent the North East is on the car, and certainly representing a very rural ward of Aberdeenshire. I know a lot of people are currently being left out in terms of public transport. It's a challenge for public transport, but however, it's not only Aberdeenshire, Aberdeen City. It's a regional, national problem. This how we manage to provide transport for those who really need it, and I think that's one of the main drivers, of this whole strategy that we kind of need to get to grips with. How we can kind of make our public transport more accessible to those who currently are basically stranded in some of the towns and villages because services have just gone downhill, and we all know why that is. I think we've got to be thinking outside the box a wee bit as to what sort of solutions we could put in place to improve equalities and to provide services for those who currently struggle to get around. And the last point I would make is, although the car usage is very high, I do suspect going forward we're going to see maybe a bit less journeys, but that's just a a gut feeling, but we can't assume that until later on. So that's all the comments I would make at the moment, Chair. Thank you.
Thanks for that, George. And Councillor Cox, would you like to make your comment on cycle paths around the coast? Can you speak up a little bit, John? We can't hear you.
Sorry, is that better?
It certainly is.
Yeah, sorry. Yes, there's a missing link from the Speyside Way through to the Buchan Way, which is the part in the middle, the Banffshire coast, and if that could be considered as part of the long-term strategy. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. George, you wanted to come in, George Mayor. George, you'll need to unmute so that we can hear you.
Okay, there we are. Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to say that I thought it was a good piece of work. It's obviously taken a lot of hard work by the team at Nestrans. I think it looks at a whole range of issues that we need to be looking at. Some of the things that Martin touched on earlier on, that we can't simply carry on as we were. It's going to need to take stock of the wide range of issues that impact on travel and transport around Aberdeen City and Shire. There's some exciting new proposals that we'll need to look at and take a view on. But there's a good mix, and it clearly recognises the hierarchy of transport in terms of the objectives that are trying to be achieved. So lots of work to be done, but a good starting point, and happy to play our part in terms of the transport operators and working with the local authorities in both parts through the bus alliance.
Thanks for that, George. That's really helpful. Colin, you wanted to come in, yes, please.
Yeah, just a quick question, really. Again, it's a cracking piece of work and reflects what we have nationally. My thoughts are actually moving forward and costing and funding. With the hierarchy, do you think that the funding will also be in that same triangle, or do we think it might be the upside down going forward? Are we going to push for that?
Good question, Colin. And funding is close to all our hearts. Rab, do you want to come in on that, please?
Yeah, just quickly. Thanks, Colin. Thanks all the contributors. Actually, that's really helpful, and I've jotted down some notes along those lines. Specifically, Colin, on the question of funding, traditionally government have used that sustainable transport hierarchy, but certainly in a national context, the funding is not along those lines. That they talk about trying to increase the use of modes at the top of that hierarchy, but the funding hasn't necessarily reflected it. What I think it would be only fair to say is there has been a big shift from the bottom of that triangle upwards, which is welcome, but it's still not in a position where it's a straight line. It's still a triangle the other way, I guess. But certainly there is more funding for walking and cycling in the last 4 or 5 years, more money for public transport as well. Although budgets, I think, may change over the next coming 18 months. What I was hoping that we could be was in a position to make sure that we got our fair of funding as it does come forward.
Thanks, Rab. I've got Philip next, I think, and then Ian.
And me, Sandra, at some point, please.
Absolutely.
Okay, right, thanks, Chair. So reading the report, it is very comprehensive, and well done for putting that together. And it talks about carbon emissions clearly, electrifying transport, road, rail, active transport, but it doesn't really, as far as I can see, and I could have missed this. It does actually mention that shipping accounts for 37% of carbon emissions for transport. And that's, that's a third of emissions for transport. So it seems to me that we've got two harbours in Aberdeen. There's a new harbour being built now. It will be finished sometime soon. I understand that that cruise ships, if they ever turn up to the harbour, will require something like 2 megawatts of shoreside power per larger ship. Also, their ships themselves are pushing out lots of pollutants, when they're actually active. And I don't see anything here for promoting electrifying ships. And I wonder if that should be something that we should be considering as well to go into this transport mix.
Thanks. Do you want to respond, Rab, to
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Bell. Yeah, certainly something we could look into. It's something we've encouraged through the development of the new harbour. Aberdeen Harbour Board were a little bit reluctant to jump one way or the other. I think my understanding is that we've created a facility which can be adapted as technologies develop. If electricity to boats was the right answer, or whether there are alternatives which might be more appropriate. But it's certainly something that I know they have been giving consideration to, and I'd be quite happy to look at whether we could bring something into the strategy at a high level to give the right framework and encouragement to that sort of thing. So thank you.
Thank you. And I do actually, just very quickly, I do know that the Aberdeen Harbour Authority have actually been looking at this quite strongly. There are some reports being drafted even as we speak, so it might be worthwhile going to talk to them. Thanks.
Thanks for that, Philip. Ian, you're next, I think. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll take my hand down as well while I remember. Looking at the report, I found it fascinating. The record of achievement of Nestrans over the past 10, 20 years has been commendable, to say the least. It's listed in there what's been achieved. There isn't quite the same aspirations for physical things on the ground, perhaps, as we've seen. Obviously, the big money ticket of the AWPR stands out. I've mentioned to Rab before the meeting one or two typos or little bits I thought could be polished. But apart from that, I think it's a sterling effort. And I do like the fact that there's a sort of an executive summary to make it a little bit more digestible for some folk. There's a couple of points I would like to make before the board, though, if this would be the appropriate point. There's a suggestion of 3 routes for cycling walking to Westhill, to Inverurie from Aberdeen city centre, and to Chapelton. Chapelton would probably get a blank stare from many people, being to the west of Newton Hill, south of Portlethen, Newtown, but making very, very slow progress. They've been hit with all the body blows that everybody knows about. It would seem to me sensible that that target destination, the link point, would be Stonehaven, which would include Chapelton and go past Newton Hill and Portlethen, etc. I would suggest that Chapelton in the report, or the draft plan rather, becomes Stonehaven. That's on page 24 of the draft plan, or 144 in our pages. And the other one is also a slight tidying up on delivering new stations, and that is on page 29 of the RTS. It says to consider whether there's a business case for additional stations. This is between Aberdeen down to Lawrence Kirk. But it doesn't actually say under paragraph 2 what happens after they've been considered. So I would leave it to officers to work in somewhere they're taking the appropriate steps after considering it, because you can consider something and then not do anything. So a couple of minor, but to my mind, important points. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you for that. Ian, did you want to respond to that directly just now, Rab, or?
Just to say thanks very much. That's the sort of comment that I think is really helpful. And if members pick up on comments over the next couple of days, I'm quite happy to take these types of comments by email and try and ensure that we have an agility to respond to members' comments. I find them really helpful. In a 90-page document, there are obviously one or two elements which have slipped through, maybe even a typo here and there, but certainly the point about the stations is well made. We've talked about, we're at the current stage of looking at the opportunity for stations, but as Ian says, absolutely right. If a business case can be made, then the strategy should be to deliver these. So I'm quite happy to look again at the wording. So thank you.
Thanks for that. And yeah, I'm mindful too that by 2040 there are going to be all sorts of other different communities and perhaps even different modes of transport we haven't even thought about at the moment that people will be using. So it is for now, but looking ahead as best we can. So that was useful. Thanks. I'll bring you in now, Martin, from wherever you are.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you. Well, firstly, can I just add my comments to those who have expressed their gratitude for the huge amount of work that has gone into this. I've taken part in various workshops and so forth over an extended period of time, and we have a very comprehensive document at the end of it. I wasn't proposing to make any detailed suggestion of changes at this stage because I think we're being asked to approve something to go out to consultation. And no, this isn't exactly what I would have written. Now that'll apply to everybody else here. But that, as I think Rab said in the introduction, that is not what we're being asked to do today. Do I agree with every word of this? No. Am I happy? And is this the right time to go out to public consultation? The answer is yes. So I'm very happy to go with that. I would make a number of observations. Firstly, after all this work, at the point that we are ready to go to consultation, a seismic event has occurred in the world that has introduced a great deal of short-term changes, and it is far too early to say what long-term changes may also result, except that it does look quite likely that there will be some. It is quite impossible and would be utterly pointless to try and revise this document now to speculate about how the world is going to look different in 5 years' time because of what's happened over the last few months. But we do have to be alert to the fact that actually what's happened over the last few months may have overtaken some of the assumptions that seemed entirely reasonable 4 months ago, 6 months ago, a year ago, and maybe are just not true anymore. And on that front, right at the start of the document, the 6 priorities of the RTS, I think the one perhaps that does not come through clearly enough is reduce the need to travel, because we've discovered that we can manage quite well, actually, with a much reduced need to travel. This meeting is evidence of that. We are having a meeting, we're having a proper discussion. The decisions are still being taken, and I think being taken perfectly properly, and none of us have left our homes. So, and I would have been skeptical about that, and now I know it works. I was in the area committee yesterday, and I'm at full council tomorrow, and all those meetings are going to be conducted properly and will take proper evidence-based decisions. Now, there is a more than a hint of reduction in there in terms of reduced carbon. We really won't reduce carbon if we don't reduce transport and travel, and we do need to reduce the need, but maybe that's a tweaking. I would just briefly comment on the point that was made about funding. Every year when Aberdeenshire Council passes its budget, one of the first paragraphs in the budget report that we have in front of Council, the head of finance reminds us that the budget is an expression in financial terms of the Council's policy priorities for the year ahead. And that's absolutely right. Rab has pointed out that the government's budget and its stated policy priorities are in a complete mismatch. And there is a governance issue there, and we should try not to fall into the same trap. If we say our priority is this, active travel, reducing carbon emissions or whatever, the budget should show that that's what it is. Because if you have a stated policy position that is one thing, and a budget that tells you that really your priority spend is something quite else, something seriously wrong with your governance process, and that is certainly true at Scottish and UK levels at the present time. So I'm happy to approve this without personally endorsing every word in it, because I think we've reached the stage where it's the right thing to do. I would make one suggestion, perhaps for a minor cosmetic change, and that is that we have here a very elegant drawing of a building, a classical building, with the 4 pillars which Rab referred to, and you can't disagree with any of the 4: more equality, tackling climate, looking after the economy and well-being of the people of the Northeast. Can't disagree with any of those. But Rab, you said that you wanted to put a northeast slant on the pillars. You haven't. Those are Ionic columns, not Doric columns. So you need to change the styling at the top of the columns so you have put a northeast slant on the columns. And apart from that, I would publish it as it is and go out to public consultation.
Thanks. We did have some chat around the music hall and well, Archibald building as well, but thanks for that. I'm sure you'll take that on board.
Thanks very much, Councillor Ford. I did do history of art at school, so Ionic and Doric and Corinthian columns are one of my specialities.
Michael, you've been patiently waiting. Would you like to put your points over? Thanks.
Yes, thanks. So it's the first time I've seen. It's the first time I've seen this. So I don't know if I've maybe missed that somewhere. Just kind of. I was wondering if there's kind of any, if it's not in a document already, if there's any consideration given to kind of, if I say like long-term reliability for bus routes, and I mean, not that I'll be able to get, if I'm at the bus stop on time, I'll get to my work on time, but if I move to a house knowing it's got good transport links to my work or to my family, that the bus route's not likely to change in 6 months and then again in 6 months and again in 6 months, as we kind of had a bit in Aberdeen recently, just to kind of, if there's changes to bus, I'm not saying don't make changes to bus routes, but kind of a bit of kind of an element of kind of consistency there might help a lot of people to actually learn where the buses go, how they can use them, and actually start taking up patronage rather than realising after 6 months the bus takes them somewhere that's helpful and then it gets changed before they get a chance to fully utilise that. If there's any kind of scope to maybe not explain, in fact, I realise I'm not explaining it in this short way, but if that makes sense and if there's any scope for that to be considered at some point. So I realise bus routes do need to change, but maybe not as frequently as some of them have done.
No, I understood what you were getting over, Michael. Rab, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, very much so. Very much support that. One of the things through the Bus Alliance that we have spoken about is to try and have a minimal number of times during the year when routes are changed. So to go for twice or even once a year, and people would know that it's always at the start of September or the end of September, that's when you get a new bus route. And I think the bus companies are quite up for that in principle. Obviously, there can be changes which require something to be done at fairly short notice, but I think they're in principle quite keen to go for a longevity. And as you say, Councillor, people maybe take a while, particularly in the new development, to get into the way of understanding where the bus routes are and what suits them. So some consistency is certainly beneficial. Sometimes through conditions on planning permissions, there can actually be a guarantee that services will run, I think, possibly up to 5 years. So again, through planning conditions, we can, or the councils can, encourage that longevity and give people a bit of confidence that a service that's there today will be there in at least the medium term.
Thanks for that. I don't have any more hands up to come in at this point, but there will be more opportunity. Maybe if we pull in Paul now to talk about oh, Jerry, you wanted to come in, please do.
Sorry, Chair, it was just to make the comment really regarding improving access to health section of the document and how COVID has changed the way the health sector is actually organised now. And we imagined and wanted to push for technological solutions and found that incredibly difficult prior to COVID. Grampian is now one of the top performers in Scotland in terms of the use of technology through technology known as Near Me. And just to give you one example, I was speaking yesterday to one practice manager who they have 12,000 patients. Yesterday, within the practice, they only saw 3 patients inside the practice because of that technology. So that technology is a good example of preventing the need for people to travel to and from healthcare appointments. And it's been widely used now, not just in general practice, but outpatient clinics and general consulting in total. So a good example of how things have changed since the document RAB has been scripted. But again, I'd like to echo my sentiments of a very comprehensive and well-written document, and perhaps you might want to reflect on the technological advancements that there's been in the last few weeks. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Jerry. Michael, have you still got your hand up, or are you okay? Right. Can I maybe ask Paul to take us through some of the supporting documents that we have to go along with the overall strategy?
Yeah, thanks very much, Chair. I'll just briefly talk about 4 supporting documents, one of which is included within the papers. The other 2 or 3 were included as links to the board papers. First of all, I'll talk about the strategic transport appraisal, and the executive summary of which is included as 227 on the report. The full report's available via a link in the board report. So in October 2016, as part of the City Region deal agreed with the 2 councils, Scottish Government and the UK Government, around a sum of £7 million was allocated to do a transport appraisal, looking at the long-term transport requirements of the area, taking a strategic view of the investment unlocked by the City Region deal based on all modes, and looking at the priorities of local, regional, national transport plans and programmes. So this work has funded background research and appraisal that's helped the strategic development plan. It's found an evidence base for the local development plans. It's being used as an evidence base to really populate some of the core policies and actions around the regional transport strategy. And this work has also helped us respond in various forms to Transport Scotland as well. So we're trying to make the best use of this funding opportunity across a number of issues affecting infrastructure in the north east of Scotland. The work, as I referred to earlier, has also helped us update the regional model and associated data collection post the completion of the AWPR. The work has, over a period of time, taken us through various stages of understanding the problems and opportunities and objectives for the North East. Last year enabled us to come up with a long list of potential interventions, about 44, I think, long lists. And then from November through to around March this year, we did a preliminary appraisal of those options, which has taken us to about 23 substantive options, which have directly fed into the regional transport strategy. I'd also add that the scope of the regional transport strategy is actually wider than the strategic transport appraisal, just because of the equalities, the health impacts, which probably fall out with the more economic focus of the work we're doing for the City Region deal. As the work has gone on, we've had 5 packages of work, 5 packages of measures have come through around city connectivity and mass transit options, rural connectivity, picking up on the point that Councillor Carr made earlier, strategic connectivity, making sure the North East is strategically connected to its key markets, safety, and demand management measures, because we realise that a lot of the consequences of trying to get people onto transport or public transport won't necessarily work unless there's a restraint mechanism there. In the appendix, we also list those measures and also indicate potential delivery pathways, whether they are via local transport strategies, the regionals, or Transport Scotland, or funding via the City Region deal as we move into the next stages of that work. This is a draft document which will also be consulted upon during the course of the regional transport strategy. The next supporting document is the strategic environmental appraisal. Lots of strategics and lots of acronyms here. This is a requirement of the Environment Assessment Scotland Act 2005 to assess, consult or monitor the likely impacts of plans, programmes and strategies. The scoping and baseline of this work has been completed, and a draft environmental report has been drafted. However, there has been a lag between the finalisation of the regional transport strategy and the environmental report. So we're not able to provide this to the board at this moment, although we will be able to make it available via our website prior to consultation. Noting the significance of the strategic environmental appraisal to the regional transport strategy and other work, we undertook an external, we asked consultants to do an external review of this work, which noted some opportunities for enhancement in the assessment tables. That work is currently being concluded this week. However, we can see that within the draft work, many aspects of the draft regional transport strategy will have a mainly positive impact on the environment through its emphasis on behaviour change, reducing the need to travel, and the promotion of alternative fuels, thinking about improving air quality, maximising the use of existing assets. However, where we have physical interventions, there may well be environmental impacts which will have to be raised in the environmental report and then taken forward for mitigation when we go to the individual project appraisals. Other work that's been undertaken is the qualities impact assessment and associated health inequalities impact assessment. When we did this work, we noticed that age and disability are particular areas of attention for us as we go forward due to the focus on active travel and some new technologies. We need to be particularly wary of the impacts that this may have on those particular areas of need. There are some unknowns where we said, well, we possibly don't know the impact, and they come around religion, sexual orientation, and gender reassignment and race. However, we're also aware that there are likely to be fewer differential impacts on these categories. And there are some negative impacts. We believe that they can be managed, and we'll work with partners about how we can address some of these unknown impacts. A health impacts inequality assessment has also backed up this work, and it pretty much helps us to focus on the way that the work we do is undertaken, and has provided a focus for our work going forward with the Bus Alliance, Health Transport Action Plan, Get About Partnership, and local authorities. A lot of this is around the interventions are generally positive, but it depends on how they're implemented, operated and monitored going forward. So we've got to make sure that when a new bus timetable is launched or there are new ticketing initiatives, they are promoted in a variety of means that are accessible, for example, across the spectrum of users. The final supporting document is a Fairer Scotland duty appraisal. The Fairer Scotland duty places a legal responsibility on public bodies in Scotland to actively consider and how they can reduce inequalities of outcome caused by socio-economic disadvantage when making strategic decisions. This provides us again with a positive framework looking at some of the key issues. But when we recognise the diversity of the North East, really the two key standout issues are those who don't have access to transport and affordability of transport, particularly for those without access to a car. And so again, we need to be particularly mindful of that when we are promoting particular initiatives to ensure that they are taken into account and we maximise how we manage to tap into these particular potential areas of need. Okay, thanks very much, Councillor MacDonald.
Thanks for that, Paul. I know there's can I ask, Paul, on the strategic environmental assessment, is that a showstopper in terms of our consultation timeline? Is it something that we require to have? Are you confident that we're going to have that?
Yeah, it's essential that it's available prior to going out to public consultation. However, the work that we are doing on that at the moment, we're confident that the vast majority of that will actually be completed this Friday. And we would be then anticipating a review period of that period, so perhaps an additional week before that is fully available. So that's our understanding. We've been in close contact with the consultants going forward, and again, they're not pulled out anything that we weren't aware of. They're just providing a greater depth across the full range of environmental impacts, which cultural heritage, soils, and watercourses, which perhaps we didn't pick up on. Perhaps we had a bit more of a focus on carbon and air quality, some of those more tangible impacts you'd expect from transport, but they've helped us broaden across the full range of potential environmental impacts. But no, I don't believe that's a showstopper, and I believe that we can make that fully available prior to consultation going forward.
Okay, thank you for that. Members, anybody else got anything they want to ask on the supporting documents, the strategy itself?
Yes,
Martin,
Sandra.
of course, come in.
It's more a comment than a question, but Paul Finch may wish to respond or comment, or indeed he may very well not wish to do that. I would just say that going through the summary document at the end, on page 238, number 8, new railway lines and associated stations, can I express disappointment with the wording that has appeared? I'm not proposing to alter it because that's the wording there is, but it quotes, "It is unlikely that railway line reopenings can be justified under existing Treasury criteria and transport appraisal criteria in the medium term, but alignments should be protected." Can I say, I would make the observation here that there are clearly double standards at work in a very unhelpful way. A project that's not listed in here is the proposal to dual the entire A96, despite the fact that traffic levels in the centre part are less than half the normal figure you would require to consider dualling the road. The BCR is catastrophic. You wouldn't normally consider it. It's only been made look half decent by inclusion of random fudge factors, and it will hugely increase carbon emissions. So, you know, if you look at our transport strategy and the national transport strategy, the case for new railway lines can be made on the basis of a significant contribution to carbon reduction and congestion reduction, even if the BCR is not as good as you would like it to be. But we have other transport projects that fail on all the same criteria plus carbon emissions that the government is committed to. Now, I am not suggesting that we can alter that world, because that is not a decision for the Nestrans Board, but it is a contradiction we should be fully aware of, and it's a contradiction that we should all be prepared to point out, because a great deal of work has been done with this background document and our whole strategy document to try and have an evidence-led transport system. Sets out the principles, says these are the principles, this is what we want to achieve, here are the policies to deliver them, and here's why. That's how we should proceed. And yet we have by far the most expensive project in the region, bigger than any of these listed combined, which doesn't fit those criteria, that doesn't meet those policies, and in fact has a huge perverse effect on one of our alleged priorities. And it's just sitting there as the elephant in the room, the white elephant in the room, perhaps I should call it. And at the moment, there is a government commitment to proceed. Of course, governments don't last forever. A more sensible set of decision makers may be substituted at some point. But at the moment, I think we have to park it. We can't change it. But I note with disappointment that one set of criteria has been applied to a rail project that would certainly reduce carbon emissions and I think brings considerable social and economic benefits. And apparently not those criteria have been applied to a much bigger project, which the government is committed to going ahead with. So I'll leave that observation sticking to the wall, Sandra, but you can't help but notice it.
I see it loud and clear. Paul, is there anything you want to add to that? You know, I in front of us, and that's what it is.
I think the history of Councillor Ford's considerations on the A96 have been very well documented across the representations made at various committees, which I've also previously been at in my previous role. And yeah, I think it's all there for the record on that respect. And I guess on the other element, we have the commitment that the Scottish Government have made on the A96. And I guess given that commitment, the public sector in the North East seeking, at least if that is going to happen, to maximise the benefit that there could be, at least to local areas, given that would be the way ahead. But no, I think that's
understood.
All I can say, really.
Yeah, okay. Philip, you've got your hand up. Would you like to make comment or ask a question?
Thank you, Chair. Just to bring a slightly lighter note to the conversation, if you hire a car from Co-Wheels now, hydrogen fuel car, you'll get free hydrogen fuel, and that offer lasts until for another 10 months. Thank you.
Thank you for that. That's worth sharing, I think. No other questions at the moment on that. So can I ask Kirsty to come in now and talk us through what we might want to do going forward with the consultation. Are you there, Kirsty?
I am, yes. Yeah, hi there. So Appendix D was, as Paul's pointed out, that there's a suite of 7 documents that would be made available for public consultation. That includes the full strategy, the at a glance, and all the supplementary documents that we've just talked about. In terms of timing of the consultation, the subject to approval today, it's proposed that we allow a period of around about 1 month just to collect all of the information, present it all in a way that's acceptable for consultation, and that we feel that we could start a public and stakeholder consultation at the end of July. We're proposing a period of 10 weeks for consultation, which would take us to early October. Although that's during the summer months, we do feel that that's an appropriate period of time and an ample period of time for stakeholders to respond, and it's taking us through September as well. There is a caveat in there if the board would like additional time to consider the strategy before approving for consultation, then we can look to arrange a supplementary board meeting if that's appropriate. In terms of the consultation and engagement channels, see the method by which we would look to undertake consultation just now, I think we have to think about carefully. We have to adapt in terms of the requirements for physical distancing and how those may change in the coming months. So we're proposing to undertake it primarily digitally through a number of channels. We've got a consultation website which has already been established, the Nestrans 2040 website, and that's already been used to undertake a discussion on all of the early consultation or discussion papers. So we would propose to use that as the central source of information for all the documents, all the guidance on how to feed into the consultation, submit comments, general questionnaires, and that would be the hub of the consultation. We're also proposing to undertake sort of more targeted dissemination with an in-depth discussion with some of the key partners, and that would include an invitation to participate in the consultation direct to all the members of the North East Transport Consultative Forum, which is a really wide-ranging group of stakeholders. We would also directly contact and invite to comment representatives from some of the more hard-to-reach groups, some of the groups that have been identified through our health and inequalities impact assessments, as well as the SEA consultation authorities have identified some groups that we should be specifically targeting. And we're also proposing to offer a range of virtual presentations, discussion forums with some of our key partners, such as the NHS, the councils, community planning partnerships, and an opportunity for us to present the strategy to them and engage in a more detailed discussion around their comments. We're also proposing to use a virtual exhibition. Normally we would have some public meetings, drop-in sessions, that kind of thing. And so in place of that, we're proposing to use a virtual public meeting. This is an approach that's currently being used by Aberdeenshire Council for the local development plan consultation. There's a link to that virtual exhibition there for those that haven't already seen it. But it essentially provides, in quite a good visual way, a range of display boards. It allows you to highlight some of the key messages. It provides the opportunity to have live chat, links to surveys, potentially videos or audio described tools on there. So there's an awful lot of benefits for that. We've had some initial discussions with a consultant that's able to provide that, and with the costs being in the region of £5,000 to £10,000 to do that. And it's anticipated that we could host that virtual exhibition on the Nestrans 2040 website and brand it in line with our current branding. And there are advantages to this format. I think there's the possibility to reach quite a wider audience, particularly younger people who might not come along to some of the events that we would traditionally hold. We do recognise as well that it's not suitable for all, so we will still need to provide alternative means to feed into the consultation. We're also proposing to supplement that with a range of PR and communications through press releases, social media channels, and marketing and advert, press adverts, that kind of thing, to just sort of try and raise awareness of the consultation and try and reach as many people as we possibly can. And we'll supplement that with evaluation and be able to kind of monitor how many people we're reaching. And obviously we'll be doing direct communication with our key stakeholders. There is a timeline included in the table at the bottom, which helps to indicate the time frame that we're thinking about. But effectively, if we're given a month to kind of bring together all the consultation materials, we're looking at end of July to early October for a consultation. That's agreeable. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Kirsty. Have we got any members wanting to ask any questions of Kirsty around any of the elements of the consultation and engagement strategy that she's outlined? I'm not seeing any questions, so that would be agreeable, I would reckon. I think the first thing maybe to establish with board members is, are we happy with what we've heard both from Kirsty and Paul and Rab, that we're ready as a board to go out to consultation now, as outlined, given, you know, to take a few weeks to put things together, rather than, you know, come back again and look at it again. Are we happy to do that? That sort of thing? Yep. Good.
Yeah.
Excellent. So unless I've got any other.
You've gone mute, Sandra.
Sorry, thank you for that. If we go to page 120, we've got the recommendations in front of us, which is effectively to approve the full draft strategy and the accompanying at a glance document, given, you know, what Rab said about, you know, feeding in bits and pieces. But I think, you know, generally to approve what we've seen in front of us, and then to note the supporting document, and to note that the environmental assessment will come very soon. Note and approve the proposals for consultation. So are we happy to do all of that, members?
Yes.
Agreed.
I'm seeing nods and all the rest. So yeah, excellent. Thanks for that. Thank you. So on to the last substantive item on the agenda, which was again a report that we get annually about what we've been up to and thoughts that go along with that. So Rab, if you could maybe help us through this document, that would be grand. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. As you say, it's an annual report which we bring forward every year. We are getting towards the end of it because most of the targets and indicators were towards 2021, and therefore recommendation, when we get to that, recommendation 3 is that we think about a new suite of indicators very much in line with the new strategy, probably for the next time we come back. This monitoring report does present the latest information available, and members will note that some of it is a bit out of date, and obviously all of it is pre the COVID pandemic, and therefore the world has changed since most of this was brought together. It has also been impacted by the oil and gas downturn over the past 4 or 5 years. There's definitely been a negative impact on some indicators, particularly the economic ones, the numbers through the airport and the numbers through the railway stations, which I think is a disappointment. The rail figures are particularly disappointing, with a decline over the last 4 or 5 years. But I think that's largely due to the impact of the oil industry, but also some closures between Aberdeen and Inverurie in summer of 2018 and of summer 2019, and some well publicised performance issues around ScotRail with the new railway services which came in last year. I am optimistic always that when we get towards coming out of the current situation and we are on Build Back Better, that the new local Inverurie to Montrose service and the new station at Kintore will see a return to growth. So I think I'm optimistic that the railway industry still has a future in the Northeast, and that a lot of the problems we've had in the last 3 or 4 years can be and will be overcome. There are obviously also many positives which I'd like to highlight, particularly areas around car share increasing, car club numbers increasing, particularly if the hydrogen fuel is free. I'm sure members of the car club will be really happy with that. The The numbers of electric vehicles, the number of EV chargers across the region are significantly up. Air quality, for the first time, I think, meets the World Health Organization criteria on both particulates and nitrogen dioxide. And one that I think we often highlight, but it is a really key one, the number of injuries and the number of fatalities in road traffic collisions is at its lowest ever figure. So, you know, that vision of zero fatalities, which I think 20 years ago no one would have thought possible, feasible, or even worth thinking about, I think is almost within reach and a real target. If we're going to have a different type of transport system going forward, it's something that that I think should be welcomed and we would work towards. The recommendations on page 251 are that we note the contents of the report and the trends against many of the RTS targets, that we approve the report for uploading to the Nestrans website, and the officers are asked to develop a suite of suitable indicators and targets to reflect the new strategy to 2040 and bring these back to a future board meeting. Happy again to take any questions or detail.
Thanks very much for that, Rab. So over to members really to ask if there's any comments or questions. Yes, Martin.
Yes, thank you to Rab and colleagues for the report. Some observations that I would like to make. Firstly, can I just get clarification here, because I can't make sense of paragraph at the bottom of page 250. I think there is a mistake in here, but I'm not sure which way round. It says the relative cost of parking to bus fares decreased between 2019 and 2020, with a day bus ticket in Aberdeen costing approximately 1.8 times the price of 2 hours parking, a reduction from 1.9 times. Now that's a sentence from a Trump speech, in that the first half of the sentence contradicts the second half of the sentence, I think. Can we just get that clarified?
Yes, maybe not today.
Maybe not today.
Yeah, but no, it says
it's a complicated one.
Yeah,
a complicated one whereby we compare the price of parking to the price of bus fares. The intention was that we would try and reduce the differential between them.
Yes.
On page 30 of the monitoring report, there is a graph that tries to explain that. I'm just trying quickly to see whether the wording of that is correct but complex, or whether there's a wee typo there. But maybe one.
You know what? I mean, I think if we're putting this up on the website, you know, we need to find just a better way of trying to say what we're trying to say in that whole. I mean, I'm with Martin on that. You know, just because it's not particularly plain English of what we're trying to do.
The point, I think, Sandra, is that I'm pretty sure it's actually wrong, but I'm not absolutely sure it's wrong. And therefore, what it certainly is, it's difficult to understand. And, you know, okay, there may be people out there who are a lot sharper than me, but nevertheless, it ought to be understandable for even the likes of me. So it probably does need some revision. Can I then make comment on the targets that we've got? You know, for the most part, they are clearly presented, although I have to say that some of them these are the targets that the board has chosen, for better or worse, but some of them are going to be still quite challenging for people to follow. So on page 266, you know, target 6, to reduce the rate of growth of traffic. So this isn't to reduce the amount of traffic, this is to reduce how fast it is increasing. And even that is quite a complicated thing for people to follow. And, you know, clearly we have not been very successful, because even if we met the target, we've still got traffic increasing by 5% per year, which is clearly unsustainable. So when you come to do your revised targets or measures, because some of them are targets and some of them really are measures to see what's going on, we really can't have a target like that. Can I make the observation that, as I did with the external auditor, that congratulating ourselves by increasing carbon emissions with a successful increase in airport traffic, and at the same time congratulating ourselves by trying to cut carbon emissions on a different element of traffic, is really fundamentally contradictory and is going to send very mixed messages to the public. We've heard a great deal over the last few weeks about clarity of messaging. It is important. If reducing carbon emissions is a priority, which it is, both due to legislation and the board says so, and it's in our strategy, then that has to be reducing carbon emissions, not well, but sometimes it's convenient to do something contradictory. So, and that just brings me to an observation for your revised targets and performance measures. Now, I will be the first to say it is really difficult to find things that measure what you want to achieve without accidentally measuring something else. And very often it can be difficult to find easily countable proxies for your overall strategy goals. But I do think there's a principle that you should apply to choosing your new targets. And the principle is the sustainable development model, the three-legged stool. Some of the targets you have now are targets where people are happy because it increases economic activity. Some of the targets you have now are where people are happy because it helps protect the environment. The whole point about the sustainable development model is it's a three-legged stool, and unless all three legs are present, the stool falls over. So you do not have measures that we are pleased to increase the traffic at the airport because it doesn't meet sustainable development, because it's perverse for the environment. All the measures should support all three legs of the stool. And if you do that, you will avoid having a new set of measures which have internal and irreconcilable contradictions between them. So could I ask that we adopt the principle of the three-legged sustainable development model as the basis for what can we measure to test our performance? And if it doesn't meet all three legs, it shouldn't be a measure of success, because it is at least not helping with one of the things we say is important. So those would be my comments, Sandra. Thank you very much. But as far as publishing what we've got on the current measures, well, yes, go ahead. As far as I'm concerned, that doesn't alter the fact that I don't think some of the measures are the right measures, and that I think we can do better next time.
Thanks for that, Martin. Colin, you wanted to come in.
Sorry, just unmute that. Just a brief thing about the measures as well. The measures that we've got previously, I think in a previous meeting we mentioned it. It's really difficult to benchmark those with other areas and what we're doing. When we're looking at the new measures, are we going to be looking at other areas and what they're doing, what they can, is there anything that they can share from to us to make things compatible, so that we can actually look at what we're doing against what other people are doing, and whether we're being successful or if we're just being lucky, or how things are going. The other thing is, with the new measures, are we just going to abandon all these measures? Because we've got quite a lot of data here. Are we going to keep measuring them along with any new measures?
Thanks for that, Colin. Just more generally, Rab, do you want to come back in on Martin's points as well? Because
no, I think very well made. My only comment, I suppose, would be that the three-pointed stool, I'm not sure that I wouldn't be hoping that we could address indicators and measures against the four-pointed pillars, if you like, which I think basically introduce equalities into the three economic, society, and environmental aspects that Martin's referring to. So I would hope that the new indicators going forward are very much related to the strategy that you've approved today. But the point that Martin's making, I certainly support, that it is about getting the balance right between these and making sure that they're not contradictory one to the other. In terms of Colin's point, yeah, quite happy to benchmark. I think we've always felt there was so much information in the monitoring report that just providing the Aberdeenshire North East and possibly Scotland figures was complicated enough. There are one or two, such as the price of monthly bus season tickets that we've matched or benchmarked against other cities. I'd be quite happy to look at benchmarking and think what might be appropriate. Again, I've never had targets that our figures should be better than Edinburgh's. It's always been our figures should be better than they were 5 years ago, I suppose. But quite happy to look at all of that, Colin, and think about what's the best way forward. Oh, sorry, and the last point about, yeah, that there's historical information. I would hope that we won't lose that we'll continue to monitor trends, even if we are less focused on them, perhaps. There are one or two already in the monitoring report, which are for information, if you like. They don't necessarily have indicators or targets against them. But I would certainly hope that the majority of these we would continue to provide information on, and could look at how trends move forward against historical figure.
Sandra, could I briefly come back on Rab's point there?
Of course you can, Martin.
Rab, I think that's a really useful suggestion that maybe that Nestrans, everyone else is applying a three-legged stool model. Nestrans is applying the 4 Doric column model, and that you can test all of your targets against the 4 Doric columns. And the criteria for including something as a target or a measure is that it must not be perverse or negative for any column. It can be neutral for a column, have no effect one way or another, but benefit others. That would still be something we wanted to do. But the moment it is perverse to any column, that is not something we should be trying to pursue. So yeah, you go ahead, develop the 4 Doric column model. Who knows, it might catch on generally. I think you've got something there that would, but there's a governance coherence to it. If that's the strategy, then the targets are tested against all the elements of the strategy. And if they work against all the elements of the strategy and they don't damage any of the elements of the strategy, then it is something we should be doing. And if it doesn't meet those criteria, we should not be doing it.
Thanks, Martin. I've got Maggie wanting to come in now.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I was going to say problem with that, maybe it's not a problem, but we would need to be confident that our 4 pillars are all of the same height and the same width, because otherwise we will end up with more targets or indicators for one than we have for the others, and that would be a trick, I guess, of finalising the strategy. And actually, we need to also decide whether we want them all to be exactly the same. I guess we do if we want to hold up the thing at the top.
Thanks for that, Maggie. And I'm sure that will be reflected in the suite of suitable indicators that come back to us under point 3 in the recommendation. Am I gauging that everybody's had their say on this one? If we could just look at the recommendations and note the contents, approve the report and get it uploaded to the website, and then instruct officers to come back to a future board meeting with those suitable indicators so that we can discuss those. Is that okay with the board? Good.
Please.
Excellent. Thank you for that. So that's the end of our agenda, board members. Just to say that our next meeting is scheduled for Wednesday, the 16th of September. I suspect we will be again doing a virtual meeting, but who knows? I certainly wouldn't like to guess, but until that time, stay safe, stay well, and we shall come together then. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I'll stop the recording now.
The song "We Shall Meet Again."
Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, everyone.